Glass shattered under Corbin Hale's boot as he kicked in the boarding house door, revolver raised, a man already bleeding out across the floor. Smoke strung his eyes, but the tremor in his left hand betrayed the old bullet wound that never healed straight. Then he saw the ledger, names of ranchers, including his own, marked sold. A woman stepped from the corner, plain, steady, nothing like her sister's reputation. You weren't meant to choose me. Corbin did lower the gun, because taking her side would bind his land to a marriage he never intended to honor. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. The man on the floor tried to lift himself on one elbow. Blood darkened his vest. He had one hand pressed to his belly and the other reaching weakly for a pistol that had slid beneath a chair. "Don't," Corbin said. The man froze. Not from fear, from knowing the voice. Outside, boots scraped the porch. Somebody ran, somebody else shouted for a doctor. The boarding house smelled of lamp oil, old coffee, and burnt paper. A corner of the ledger still smoked where it had been tossed against the stove and missed. Corbin stepped forward and snatched it up. His name was there in a neat clerk's hand. Corbin Hale, 2,300 acres, water rights attached. Transfer contingent upon lawful marriage contract witnessed and filed. Beneath it was another name, Miss Eliza Vance. He looked at the woman again. She was not the sister men in town talked about with foolish grins and straightened coats. That one was Laurel Vance, all bright hair and practiced laughter, the one who could stop a room by entering it. Corbin had seen her once at a church social and once from horseback on Main Street. Men made room for her without knowing they were doing it. This woman was quieter. Brown hair pinned plain beneath a bonnet gone crooked in the struggle, a narrow face, clear eyes, no trembling. Her sleeve was torn at the cuff, and there was a bruise beginning along one cheekbone. The bleeding man gave a raw laugh that turned to a cough. "Too late, Hale, you stepped in. That's witness enough." Corbin's revolver shifted toward him. "Who wrote this?" The man swallowed blood and bitterness together. "Men richer than me." "Names." But the woman spoke first. "If you stay another minute, they'll say you came here for me on purpose." He cut his gaze to her. "Did I?" "No," her voice stayed level. "But they'll say it just the same." Another set of boots pounded up the porch steps. Corbin crossed to the door and pulled it nearly shut, leaving only a sliver. Sheriff Tully's shape moved past the front window. "Corbin," came the sheriff's voice, "open it." Corbin did not answer. He looked at the woman. "You know what this is?" "Yes. You signed it." Her silence was answer enough. His jaw hardened. Then she said, "Not all of it." Sheriff Tully hit the door once with the flat of his hand. "You hear me?" The man on the floor tried to grin through pain. "That's the game now, Hale. Rich rancher with a bride he didn't court and papers he can't explain." Corbin crossed the room in 2 strides and kicked the pistol farther under the chair. He crouched by the man. "You tell me who set this, and I might remember you need a doctor before a jail cell." The man's eyes flicked toward Eliza. It was quick enough to miss unless a man had spent years surviving on what other men gave away with their eyes. "There," Corbin said softly, "you're scared of the wrong person." The man shut his mouth. Corbin rose. "Open the back." Eliza did not move. "I said open it." "If I do, you'll be seen with me." "I've been seen already." "You still have a chance to say you came for the gunshot and nothing more." Corbin stared at her. Her calm angered him because it had no panic in it, only arithmetic. She was measuring consequences while a man bled on the floor and the sheriff hammered at the door. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "I'm not." That almost made her smile. Almost. She turned, crossed to the kitchen door, and lifted the latch. Cold night air slipped in with the smell of dust and horses. Corbin caught her arm before she stepped through. "If you run, they'll hunt you." "Yes. If you come with me, they'll say I claim you." Her eyes held his. "Yes." He let go, then cursed under his breath, caught her arm again, and pulled her past him into the alley. Behind them, Sheriff Tully shouted. The wounded man started yelling lies before the door had even finished swinging shut. They ran between the boarding house and the barber shop, boots striking hard-packed dirt. Corbin's left hand ached, where the old wound never stopped aching when rain was coming or trouble was near. Tonight it had both reasons. He shoved the ledger under his coat and kept moving. At the alley mouth, his bay gelding stood tied where he had left him. Corbin loosed the reins, swung into the saddle one-handed, then looked down. Eliza Vance had not begged, had not pleaded, had not even asked where he meant to take her. "You ride," he said. "Yes." "Good." He reached down. She took his forearm, planted a foot on the stirrup, and came up behind him without grace or fuss. Then he drove his heels in. The horse lunged forward. They cut across the dark edge of town while voices rose behind them. Lamps flared in windows. A dog barked itself hoarse. Somewhere Sheriff Tully was still shouting Corbin's name, which was bad enough. Worse was the fact he was not shouting for a murder suspect or a thief. He was shouting after a man who had left town with a woman whose name sat under his on a marriage ledger. By the time they cleared the last sheds and feedlots, the moon had lifted pale above the open land. Corbin did not take the road to his ranch. Roads had ears in a county like this. He headed north through a dry wash choked with mesquite and scrub oak. The brush clawed at his boots and coat. Behind him, Eliza sat steady, light as a rolled blanket, but he could feel every place she kept herself from leaning against him. After a mile, he slowed. After 2, he stopped beside a stone-cut stream bed that still held a ribbon of water under shadow. He swung down, wincing when his left hand took more of the landing than it should. He tied the horse to a cottonwood root and turned. Eliza had already dismounted. She stood with her torn sleeve hanging loose and the night wind moving a few strands of hair around her face. She looked tired now that the rush was past, not frightened, just tired in the deep way of somebody who had spent too long waiting for the worst thing and found out there was another one after it. Corbin pulled out the ledger and opened it under moonlight. Pages of names, acreage, water access, existing debt, widowhood, sons of military age. Daughters of marriageable age, not just his ranch, half the valley. Who had this? He asked. Where's Bonner? The man on the floor. Yes. He's a clerk, not a planner. No. Corbin lifted his eyes. He keeps books for men who don't dirty their own hands, she said. He turned a page. There were coded marks in the margins, small symbols by certain names, a cross, a circle, a slash through both. What do they mean? I don't know all of them. You know some. She said nothing. He shut the book. You'd best start deciding whether you want me ignorant or angry. A softer man might have regretted the sharpness. Corbin had been a softer man once. That was before grief cured him of certain luxuries. The wind moved through the cottonwoods with a dry whisper. Finally, Eliza said, "The circle means vulnerable, debt, illness, no sons, thin water. The cross means marriage can secure the transfer. The slash means force if marriage fails. Corbin stood very still. Force, he repeated. Foreclosure, seizure, a charge made public, whatever breaks a family quickest. Who? I don't know every hand in it. That is not what I asked. She met his stare. Men from the rail syndicate, a lawyer from Abilene, county clerks paid to look respectable while they rob people clean, and men here, men you shake hands with. Corbin glanced down at his own name again. Why him? Because he had land men wanted, water that did not run dry in August, a house built solid, cash enough to weather a bad year, no wife, no children, no brothers to stand beside him. A man like that was either dangerous or useful. He looked back at Eliza. And you, what are you? The question landed harder than he meant it to. He saw that in the slight change at her mouth, but she answered, I was supposed to be useful. A coyote barked far off to the east. Corbin rested the ledger against his thigh. Explain. She looked at the stream, not at him. My father died 2 winters ago, left debts he had hidden from us, gambling debts, notes on the house. Laurel thought beauty might save us. Men always watched her. Men always offered things. She learned young how to let them think. I learned young how to be the one they did not see. That sounds like a sermon beginning, not an answer. It is the answer. She raised her gaze. Wees Bonner came first with a promise, then Mr. Creed came with contracts, then others. They said marriages could settle claims quietly, a widow here, a daughter there, a joining of names and property, respectable on paper, quicker than guns. Creed. Yes. Sealer's Creed, lawyer, land agent. Smoother than wet stones and twice as treacherous. Corbin had seen him in town often enough, always dressed too clean for a cattle county. Creed smiled like a preacher collecting pledges for a church he had already sold. You said you weren't meant to be chosen, Corbin said. No. Why? She hesitated. Because Laurel was the bait, she said at last. Men chased her, men boasted over her, men bid against each other without naming it. The talk around town made its own kind of rope. While they watched Laurel, papers moved elsewhere, quietly. And you? I was to stand where needed, sign where needed, fill a blank if a better match slipped away. He stared at her. There was no courtship, she went on. That was never the point. Only signatures, witnesses, filing, ownership. The truth of it made his stomach turn colder than the night air. You signed under my name. No, that came quick. Not at first. Your name was written in later. By whom? Bonner, I think, or Creed. I had seen your ranch listed before, but not tied to me. Not until this week. Why me? Because you are the richest unmarried man in the county, and because men believe a quiet man can be cornered if enough respectable paper is stacked around him. That sounded true enough to be offensive. Corbin rubbed at the scar in his palm where the rains had worn grooves over years. Then, why were they trying to burn the ledger? Because I changed it. He looked up sharply. The moon gave her face no softness. I copied some pages, she said, moved marks, hid certain names. I thought if their order failed, families might have time. We's found out. Corbin took a step toward her. You expect me to believe you risked your neck for strangers? No, I expect you to believe I risked it for my sister first. There it was, not sainthood, blood. He promised laurel to a railroad investor from Topeka, Eliza said. A man old enough to be our father. She laughed when he visited, poured coffee, kept him smiling. Then she came home and vomited until there was nothing left. For the first time, anger moved through her voice like heat under iron. I thought the whole thing was ugly but survivable, she said. Then I read further: farms, widow homes, water parcels. If Laurel married where they wished, our house debt vanished and other doors opened. If she refused, they would use me where needed and take the house besides. So I began changing what I could. Corbin said nothing for a long moment. He had judged her in the room before he knew her name proper. Plain, steady, in the corner, easy to overlook. That, he understood now, had been the foundation of the scheme. Men built empires on what they could overlook. His horse tugged at the reins and lowered its head to water. What does Creed want from me? Corbin asked. Your land. That much I knew. She looked out across the dark wash. More than that, he wants your water rights tied into a larger corridor they're building west. He wants a chain of ranches that can be sold in one block. You hold the center. Corbin exhaled once through his nose. And a marriage to you would open the gates. Yes. He closed the ledger again. He knew the law well enough to know how little justice and legality resembled each other once money paid to dress one in the other's coat. A filed intent, a witnessed emergency vow, a claim of protection converted to possession. Creed could make a church altar out of a mud puddle if enough county officials nodded. What would you have done if I hadn't come through that door? He asked. Bonner would have dragged me to Creed before dawn. And then I would have signed whatever spared Laurel first. Corbin looked away. For an instant he saw another room, another lamp, another woman with her hand on a folded paper and tears she would not let fall until after he turned his back. Not a sister. Not a scheme, just a small grave months later and a silence in his house that never learned mercy. He shoved the memory down hard. We are riding to my line shack, he said. At first light we head for the county seat. Why there? To put this before Judge Barlow, before Creed does. That judge plays cards with men like Creed. He does, but he likes his own reputation better than their friendship. If I make enough noise in front of enough witnesses, he'll listen. And if he doesn't? Corbin looked at her with the blunt honesty that made some men trust him and others hate him. Then I'll know exactly which house to burn. That drew the smallest breath from her, not quite surprise, not quite fear. You mean that, she said. I said it. They rode again before the moon crossed much higher. North first, then west toward a line shack on the rough edge of Corbin's summer range. It was no more than 4 walls, a roof, and a stove pipe, but it had a bar on the door and blankets that smelled of cedar. Corbin lit one lamp, fed the horse, then stood awkwardly inside the narrow room with Eliza Vance and the sudden fact of a woman in a place where no woman had been in years. There's coffee, he said, if you can tolerate bad coffee. I can tolerate most things. That I had gathered. He set the ledger on the table and went outside again to check the saddle cinch, though it needed no checking. The night gave him space to think, not enough space, but some. He had lived alone too long to welcome disruption. Folks called him rich because the ranch was broad and the creek held. They forgot how much of a man could go barren while his land stayed green. After Anna died and the child with her, men had invited him to town more from unease than kindness. A solitary man with money troubled people. They wanted him remarried, softened, rejoined to ordinary life, as if grief were a fence mended by enough neighbor hands. He had declined everything: church suppers, holiday tables. Polite daughters pressed into conversation by ambitious mothers. He had done it so steadily, the county turned his reserve into character. Hale keeps to himself. Hale doesn't mix. Hale's hand never healed right after the war, and neither did the rest of him. That had suited him. Now he had a ledger in his coat and a woman in his line shack whose name could cost him the center of his land. When he came back inside, she was seated at the table, reading the pages by lamplight. Her face had changed in the warm glow. Not prettier exactly, more legible. He could see intelligence sharpened by fatigue. He could see the discipline it took to sit still when every instinct must be telling her to run. "There's one more thing," she said without looking up. He leaned against the door frame. "There usually is. The marks beside your name." He crossed over. She touched the page with one finger, a circle, a cross, and beneath them, almost invisible, a black dot no bigger than a fly speck. "I never learned all the marks," she said. But Bonner once said the dot meant the target must be handled personally. No substitutes, no delays. Corbin's expression did not change, but something in him locked. Meaning. Meaning someone wants your land badly enough to watch the matter themselves. He stared at the mark. Then he said, "Who has enough money for that and not enough patience to buy me outright? I was hoping you knew." He thought of the railroad men he had refused last autumn. They had come smiling with maps and promises. Spur lines, storage depots, new prosperity. He had heard only one thing in their speech: surrender. Once tracks crossed his water corridor, the valley ceased belonging to the people who worked it and started belonging to the people who tallied it. He had refused, politely first. Then plainly, maybe one of them had decided plain refusals required complicated replies. "You should sleep," he said, "and you." "I'll stay awake. That hand of yours will shake worse by morning." He looked down. The tremor had begun again. The old bullet had shattered bone and left him with strength enough, but never steadiness when strain settled in. He despised the weakness because he could not command it. "It has before," he said. She closed the ledger and rose. "You might let me keep watch part of the night." "No. Because I'm a woman. Because you've lied to me twice since moonrise." That stopped her. He regretted nothing about saying it. Then she nodded once. "Fair." She lay down on the bunk with her boots off and one hand still near the knife she had taken from the table when she thought he had not noticed. Corbin noticed most things. It was one reason he was still alive. Near dawn, while the lamp burned low and the wind pushed dust against the chinking, Eliza slept at last. Corbin watched her from the chair by the stove. He tried to picture Laurel, the sister everyone wanted, the one whose beauty had drawn the eye while papers moved elsewhere. He tried to picture the part Eliza played in that dance and failed. It was easier to imagine Eliza copying ledgers at night than smiling over coffee for an old man's benefit. Easier to believe she had crossed a line and then found the line moving beneath her feet. At first light, they rode south and east toward Red Flats, the county seat. Corbin kept off the main road until the land forced him back to it near noon. By then the sun was white and merciless. Heat shimmered above the ruts. Crows perched on fence posts like bad thoughts. Twice he saw riders far behind them, not trying to close, just keeping them known. Eliza saw them too. She did not mention it. Near the Haskins place they passed a house with no smoke rising and shutters hanging crooked. A woman stood in the yard holding a child on one hip and staring at an empty corral. Corbin slowed. That family was listed, Eliza said quietly. He looked at the yard again. A broken water trough, a single milk cow, no horse team, foreclosed, he asked. I think so. The child in the woman's arms coughed. Dry, tired. Corbin rode on, and the sight went with him like a nail in the boot. By late afternoon, red flats appeared ahead, low and sun-bleached around the square. Wagons clustered near the feed store. Men stood in storefront shade with hats low and opinions ready. The moment Corbin Hale rode in with Eliza Vance behind him, silence spread in the way only a town can manage when it smells scandal and pretends it smells weather instead. Corbin dismounted at the courthouse hitch rail. He handed Eliza down and saw 3 heads lean together by the mercantile window. Stay close, he said. Do you expect kindness? No, I expect witnesses. Inside, the courthouse was cooler, but no cleaner. Dust lay in the corners of respectability. A deputy glanced up from a desk, saw Corbin, then saw Eliza and stood too quickly. Judge in, Corbin asked. The deputy swallowed. He's hearing probate. Then he can hear theft after. They did not make it halfway down the hall before Silas Creed stepped from an office door as if summoned by the smell of his own work. He wore a dark coat despite the heat and carried gloves he did not need. Mr. Hale, he said warmly. Miss Vance, this is a surprise. It shouldn't be, Corbin said. Seems you've spent days arranging it. Creed's smile thinned by a hair. I'm afraid I don't follow. Corbin held up the ledger. For the first time, Creed's eyes lost their polish and became simple animal things, calculating, immediate, cold. Then the smile returned. A misunderstanding, no doubt. Oh, good, then you won't mind explaining it before the judge. Creed looked to Eliza. Miss Vance, I had hoped you'd come to your senses by now. Eliza said nothing. Your sister is worried, Creed continued. This stubbornness helps no one, least of all Mr. Hale. Speak her name again, Corbin said, and I'll pull out one of your fine lawyer teeth. The deputy made a nervous sound somewhere behind them. Creed took a measured breath. Threats in a courthouse, Mr. Hale, are unwise. So is fraud. The office door behind Creed opened again. Judge Barlow himself emerged, grey-whiskered and irritable, spectacles low on his nose. What is this racket? Corbin stepped past Creed without asking leave. A land theft dressed as marriage. I'd like 5 minutes before you decide whether your robe still means anything. Barlow looked from Corbin to Eliza to the ledger. He knew all of them by sight. That was the trouble in counties like these. Every corruption wore a familiar face before it wore handcuffs. Come in, the judge said at last. Creed began, Your Honor. You too, Creed. If your name is Klain, you can wash it in front of me. Inside the office, the air smelled of ink and old paper. Barlow sat. Creed remained standing. Corbin handed over the ledger. Eliza stood near the wall, hands together, back straight. She had the look of a woman determined not to let her knees betray her. Barlow read, turned pages, read again. These are serious allegations, he said. They are serious crimes, Corbin answered. Creed spread his hands. A draft record only, preliminary instruments, no force of law. Mr. Hale has leapt to a conclusion. A draft with marks beside widow names and debt parcels. Corbin said, "A draft with my acreage under a woman I've never courted." Creed turned slightly toward the judge. "As you can see, Mr. Hale's name appears because he was considered an eligible party in a lawful discussion. No more, no papers were filed." "No papers yet," Eliza said. All three men looked at her. Creed's voice sharpened almost invisibly. "Miss Vance has been under strain." Eliza met the judge's gaze. "Mr. Bonner had filing instructions set for dawn tomorrow if I was delivered back to him tonight." Barlow's brows drew down. "Delivered?" She did not look at Creed. That was the word used. Corbin saw the judge notice the bruise on her cheek then. "Good," Creed said, "this is theater." Barlow flipped farther into the ledger. "What are these symbols?" Silence. Then Eliza said, "Classifications." Barlow looked over his spectacles. "Meaning?" She answered steadily. "Which families might be pressured by marriage, debt, illness, or public shame." That stripped the room of all softness. Even the deputy in the doorway seemed to understand the shape of something foul. Creed's voice cooled. "Your Honor, before this turns into slander, I ask that Miss Vance be reminded of the consequences of false testimony." Corbin took one step toward him. Barlow raised a hand. "Enough." He closed the ledger. "I will hold this book pending review." Creed inclined his head. "Of course." "And until then," the judge continued, "no filings related to any names herein will be accepted." That landed. Creed hit it well, but Corbin saw the strike. "Miss Vance will remain under county protection," Barlow said. "No," Corbin said at once. Barlow's eyes cut up. "You do not instruct this court." "No," Corbin agreed. "But if she stays in county rooms, Creed's friends visit her by dark." Creed gave a pained look of injured virtue that would have fooled strangers and no one else. Barlow drummed fingers on the ledger. "Then where?" Corbin already knew the answer before the judge spoke it, knew and hated it. "With the only man in this county who seems willing to stake something public on her safety," Barlow said, "Mr. Hale." Creed's smile returned, small and poisonous. There it was, the trap shifting shape while pretending to retreat. Corbin said, "That arrangement implies more than protection." Barlow said, "Then conduct yourself with the dignity to disprove rumor." "Rumor isn't what I worry about." "No," the judge said, not kindly. "You worry about paper. So do I, which is why Miss Vance must remain where any harm to her becomes visible and costly." Corbin understood the logic. He resented it because it was sound. Creed adjusted his gloves. "Perhaps the church parsonage." "No," Eliza said. The room stilled again. Barlow looked at her. "Why no?" She spoke slowly, aware every word mattered. "Because if I'm moved from Mr. Hale now, it will be said I was never with him under lawful intent at all. Mr. Creed will claim panic, confusion, misreporting. If I remain under Mr. Hale's visible protection, this matter cannot be smoothed quiet." Corbin turned his head slightly and looked at her. That was not a frightened woman speaking. That was a player who knew the board. The judge noticed too. So did Creed. Barlow sat back. "Very well. Temporary guardianship for protection purposes only. Written order. Deputy Miles will draw it." "Guardianship," Corbin said. "You make it sound like livestock." Barlow's eyes sharpened. Then don't make me prove I have broader language. Creed bowed a fraction, a practical solution. Corbin would have preferred a fistfight. Paper left fewer bruises and more grave. By the time they stepped back into the heat, half the square knew enough to lie convincingly about the rest. Eyes followed them. Laurel Vance stood across the street beside a hired carriage, one gloved hand gripping the door. She was every inch the sister people spoke of. Gold-brown hair catching sun, blue dress cut to flatter without seeming to try, a face made for portraits and apologies. But the moment Corbin saw her eyes, all the town's foolish talk fell away. She looked scared, not delicate scared. Used up scared. "Eliza," she called. Eliza stopped. Laurel crossed the street fast, then slower when she neared Corbin, as if remembering the whole town was watching. "I've been looking everywhere." Creed appeared on the courthouse steps behind them like a stain that would not rinse out. "You should not be in town alone," he said to Laurel. She flinched before she could stop herself. Corbin saw it, so did Eliza. Laurel turned to her sister. "Come home." "No." Tears brightened Laurel's eyes, but her voice held. "They'll come harder now." Eliza looked at her for a long moment. "Then stop standing where they can use you." The words landed like a slap. Laurel swallowed and drew herself up. "I stood where I had to," she said quietly, "same as you." For an instant Corbin thought Eliza might go to her, might fold. Instead she said, "Then choose different." Creed stepped closer. "This is not the place." Corbin turned. "That sentence could be carved on your coffin." Laurel looked between them all, then at Corbin last. There was no flirtation in it. Only a terrible appeal. "Do not trust anyone who offers ease," she said. Then she got into the carriage and drove away. That night Eliza stayed in Corbin's house. The fact itself traveled through the county faster than rainwater. His ranch sat 6 miles west of town, a broad, low house of cottonwood beams and stone with a deep porch facing the creek. Once there had been flowers under the windows because Anna liked them. After she died, the beds went dry. Corbin never noticed until guests did. Mrs. Prout, his cook-housekeeper from the bunkhouse side, took one look at Eliza, one look at Corbin, and asked no foolish questions. She simply said, "You're hungry," and put food on the table. That earned her Corbin's gratitude, which he expressed by saying nothing at all. After supper, Eliza stood in the front room staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. A young woman seated stiffly in Sunday clothes. Corbin beside her, years younger, less weathered, one hand resting lightly behind her chair. "Your wife?" Eliza asked. "Yes." "She looks kind." "She was." Eliza nodded once and did not ask how long she had been gone. That restraint struck him harder than any comfort would have. Later, when the lamps were low and the house had fallen into the listening silence of night, Corbin found her in the study with the ledger open again. "You don't tire of dangerous reading," he said. She looked up. "Do you tire of dangerous truth?" He came around the desk. "Show me." She had sorted names by county sections. With a pencil she had marked clusters around water access, road approaches, and parcels the railroad had eyed previously. The pattern emerged grim and clear, not random acquisitions, a corridor, a band of land from East Ridge to West Crossing, with Corbin's ranch at the middle seam. "If they get yours," she said, "they connect the northern parcels and sell the whole strip. Why not simply wait for a bad season and buy cheap? Because your water keeps your neighbors alive in dry years. As long as you hold, they can too. He understood then the deeper ugliness. This was not just greed, it was strategy. Starve the edges till the center can be isolated, he said. Yes. He leaned over the desk, one hand flat on the wood. The old wound throbbed like an ember driven into bone. You changed pages, he said. How much? Enough to buy time, not enough to stop them. Why not bring it straight to the judge then? She held his gaze, because until today I did not know if the judge belonged to them. That answer, I believe. She hesitated. There is more. He waited. I did not only change pages, I copied one contract in full and hid it. His head lifted. Where? Her face closed slightly. Not yet. He stared at her. You expect trust while you ration truth, he said. I expect survival while I learn whether you are honorable or merely angry. For a moment, neither moved. Then Corbin gave one hard, humorless breath. That may be the first intelligent insult spoken in this room. A faint tiredness touched her eyes that might have been amusement if she had possessed any to spare. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark, a horse whinnied. At dawn, smoke rose from Corbin's south pasture. One of his hay sheds burned hot and fast. By the time the hands reached it with buckets, the roof had collapsed inward in a roar of sparks. Corbin rode down half-dressed, shirt open at the throat, gun belt buckled crooked. Eliza came behind on a borrowed mare, skirt pinned up for riding hard. The men beat at the fire's edges while cattle bawled from the far fence. Jeb Mercer, Corbin's foreman, came up blackened and furious. Lantern was smashed inside. This was no accident. Corbin took in the trampled grass, the cut fence wire on the creek side, hoofprints leading out. A warning, visible, costly, not yet mortal. He looked at the burning timbers and knew exactly who had sent it. Jeb spat into the dirt. Town says you brought home a wife and a lawsuit in one saddle. I told them they were half wrong and fully stupid. Corbin did not answer. Jeb lowered his voice. Men are asking if they should stay on. They got families. There was the real wound. Not timber, not hay, pressure. If any man wants his wages and out, Corbin said, he takes both with no shame from me. Jeb studied him, and if he wants to stand, then he'd best know this grows worse. By noon, 3 hands had left. 2 stayed. Mrs. Prout cooked, as if feeding men under siege were an everyday domestic nuisance. Eliza watched the movement with a face gone quiet again. This is the cost, she said when they stood alone by the black shell of the shed. No, Corbin said, this is the first invoice. That evening, Sheriff Tully rode out with dust on his coat and worry on his brow. I got orders to keep peace, he said. Then you rode to the wrong ranch, Corbin replied. Peace left town yesterday in a lawyer's pocket. Tully pulled his hat off and wiped his forehead. He was not a bad sheriff, only a tired one. There was a difference, though it did not help much. Creed filed complaint, he said, says you abducted Miss Vance and are coercing testimony. Corbin's expression did not change. And you rode 6 miles to insult my porch with it. Tully looked past him at Eliza, who stood in the doorway. Miss Vance, do you say that? No. Are you here against your will? No. Did Mr. Hale force you from the boarding house? He prevented me from being delivered back to men who meant harm. Tully nodded as if he had expected nothing simpler. Then I'll report that." Corbin said, "You know Bonner was shot before I entered." "I know Bonner says otherwise." "Bonner lies when he's healthy. Why begin trusting him now?" Tully sighed, "Because men above me prefer a neat lie to a sprawling truth." Eliza stepped down from the porch. "Sheriff, if a woman brought you proof county officers were being bribed, who would you take it to?" Tully looked at her carefully. "Depends which officers." "That answer tells me enough," she said. He did not bristle, he only looked older. When he rode away, the sky had gone copper over the creek. Corbin stood with hands on the porch rail until the sound of hooves faded. "You think him weak," Eliza said behind him. "I think him measured." "That is gentler." "It is truer." She came beside him. Across the fields, smoke still rose in thin black ghost lines from the shed. "Laurel sent word," she said. He turned. "She wants to meet tomorrow at St. Agnes Cemetery." "You trust that?" "No." "Then we don't go." "I didn't say, I was asking." He looked at her. In the cooling light, her bruise had yellowed at the edges. It made him angrier now than when it was fresh. "Creed may use her," he said. "She may know it and come anyway, or she may not. Either way, it smells wrong." "Eliza," he repeated, and this time her name came out with the force of command. But she only said, "She is still my sister." He had no answer to that. The cemetery sat on a rise east of town where cedar and mesquite gave scant shade over white stones. Corbin arrived before Eliza because there had been no stopping her and no sense pretending otherwise. He circled wide, dismounted behind the church wall, and watched from cover among the cedars. Laurel stood by a fresh grave with her veil pinned back. She had come alone or meant it to appear so. Eliza walked up the hill in plain gray, hands empty and visible. For a moment, the sisters only looked at one another over the small field of dead. Then Laurel said, "I'm sorry." Eliza said nothing. Laurel laughed once brokenly. "There. That did not mend much." "Sorry for what?" "For not seeing soon enough that they were using both of us. For being vain when we could not afford vanity. For letting you become the spare key to every door." Eliza's face moved by a fraction. "And now? Now they know you changed the pages." Laurel glanced toward the church, toward town, toward everything watching. "Mr. Creed is afraid." "Good." "No, not good." Laurel stepped nearer. "Afraid men are worse than confident men." She reached into her reticule. Corbin tensed behind the cedar, hand already on his revolver, but Laurel only took out a folded paper. "I found this in Creed's desk while he was meeting with the rail men," she said. "I had to smile through their talk and pour coffee while they planned how to strip this county to boards." She held out the paper. Eliza took it. "What is it?" she asked. "A debt assignment, father's note, and another attached beneath it." Laurel's mouth tightened. "They paid the note years ago, bought it cheap after his death. Everything they told us about saving the house was a lie from the start. They never meant to spare us, only to move us where we were useful." Eliza unfolded the paper. Corbin could not read the words from where he was, but he saw the change in her shoulders. "There's more," Laurel said softly. "The investor from Topeka is gone. They no longer need me to charm him. They mean to leave me with Bonner's cousin in Wichita once this is settled." The horror of that landed clear even at distance. Eliza lifted her eyes. "Come with us." Laurel smiled without joy. You know they won't let me. A branch cracked somewhere downslope. Corbin rose with the revolver already out. Two men came from behind the tombstones, another from the church fence, all carrying the lazy confidence of hired work. Laurel, Corbin called, and both women started at once. The nearest rider lunged for Eliza. Corbin fired. The man spun and fell across a grave marker. Laurel screamed. Eliza dropped low and came up with a cemetery vase smashed in one hand, striking another man across the temple. He cursed and reeled. Corbin ran downhill, left hand shaking, right hand steady enough. Get behind the stone, he barked. The third man drew on him from near the gate. Corbin fired again and missed by inches as the tremor betrayed the line. Dirt kicked. The man shot back. Stone burst above Corbin's shoulder. Then Laurel moved, not away, toward. She stepped straight into the gunman's arm, seized his wrist with both hands, and drove it upward just as he fired. The shot cracked harmless into sky. Eliza hit him from the side. All three went down in dust and dead grass. Corbin reached them in time to drag the man off and strike him once with the pistol butt. The man sagged. Laurel. She was on her knees, breath tearing fast. Blood darkened her glove. Eliza, Laurel whispered. At first Corbin thought it was someone else's blood. Then he saw the hole low in her side, where the struggle and the shot had found each other. The world narrowed with cruel speed. Eliza pressed both hands to the wound. No, no. Laurel tried to smile. You were always the brave one. Stop. I hated that they made us choose roles, Laurel said, voice thinning. Pretty, plain, easy words for a cage. Corbin tore off his neckerchief and thrust it into Eliza's hands. Press. Laurel looked at him then, clear, direct. You really did choose her. He had no language for the accusation and blessing tangled in that sentence. I chose to stop thieves, he said. A faint laugh shook in her. Liar. Then pain bent her. Corbin carried her to the church wagon track where the horse could come nearer. They got her to town alive. Barely. Doc Penrose worked an hour with sleeves rolled and face grim, while Eliza waited outside the surgery room white as bleached cloth. Corbin stood opposite her in the hallway, hat in hand, unable to think of a single useful sentence. At last Penrose came out, tired and red to the elbows. She may last the night, he said. No promises. Eliza sat down without seeming to know she had. Corbin looked through the crack in the door. Laurel lay small under sheets, beauty made irrelevant by pain. The sight struck him with the old knowledge grief brings. No face, no charm, no wealth has ever argued death into fairness. He stayed because leaving would have been a kind of cowardice he could not abide. Near midnight Laurel woke long enough to ask for Eliza. Corbin turned away while the sisters spoke low in the room. He heard only fragments. Not your fault. Was never yours to carry alone. Under the cedar chest. The copy. Then the voice weakened to breath. When Eliza came out, she held herself with terrible care, as if her bones had become glass. She hid the copied contract, Eliza said, at the house, under Mother's cedar chest. Corbin nodded once, then we get it. They'll be watching. Yes. I'm going. So am I. She looked at him then, and for the first time all the guarded skill in her face gave way to plain human exhaustion. Why? Because he was already too far in. Because every new choice narrowed the road behind him. Because Anna had once asked him whether a man becomes what he does most often, and he had not answered until she was gone. Instead he said, "Because men are burning my hay and shooting women in churchyards." It was enough. They went before dawn. The Vance house stood at the south edge of town behind a stand of cottonwoods, modest once, shabby now. Corbin left his horse in the trees and entered by the kitchen window because the front door was too obvious. Eliza slipped in after him, moving like someone who had done hard things in small rooms before. The house still held signs of women trying to make poverty look orderly. Curtains mended neat, silver polished despite dents. One cracked china bowl placed carefully where its good side showed first. In the front parlor, the cedar chest sat beneath a faded sampler. Eliza knelt and shoved it aside. Beneath the lining, she found an oilcloth packet tied with blue thread. Footsteps sounded on the porch. Corbin pulled her up hard. Kitchen. The front door opened before they reached it. Silas Creed's voice carried in smooth as cream. Search thoroughly. She was always sentimental about home. Corbin's jaw set. They had seconds only. He shoved Eliza through the pantry and down the back steps just as two men entered the parlor. One saw movement and shouted. Corbin turned, fired through the pantry opening, and the man dropped with a scream and a ruined shoulder. Then they were running through the kitchen garden while bullets slapped fence rails behind them. They reached the cottonwoods and the horses in a burst of leaves and dust. Corbin swung up. Eliza thrust the packet inside her bodice and mounted bareback behind him on the second horse. They tore away south across open pasture with Creed's riders pouring from the Vance yard. This time there was no quiet trailing. They meant to take them. Corbin cut toward the Arroyo country where gullies split the ground like axe blows. The riders gained on the straight stretches, lost ground where the land broke rough. One bullet clipped his hat brim, another struck sparks from stone. Left. Eliza shouted over the thunder of hooves. He trusted the call without time to weigh it and veered into a narrow wash half hidden by greasewood. The horse slid, caught itself, plunged on. Behind, one of Creed's men tried the turn too fast and went down in a chaos of horseflesh and curses. They did not stop until noon at a hidden spring beneath Red Rock. Corbin dismounted and bent over, hands on thighs, breath soaring. His left hand shook so hard he had to clasp the wrist with the other. Eliza stood beside the rock wall, one hand over the packet hidden against her chest. "Are you hit?" "No." She watched his hand. "You missed in the cemetery because of it." "Yes." "Why say it plain?" "Because you already know." She let the truth settle between them. Then she brought out the oilcloth and untied the blue thread. Inside was the contract, not draft pages, not notes. A final instrument bearing the seal of the state land office, 2 witness signatures, a provisional clause, and a name at the bottom that made Corbin's blood go cold. Edmund Vale. He read it again. Edmund Vale, investor, rail director, and more importantly, Anna's father. For a long moment the spring, the rock, the whole burning world dropped away. Anna Vale Hale, his dead wife. Her father had disapproved of him. Rancher, veteran, too blunt, not polished enough for the Eastern ambition Edmund Vale had worn like cologne. But Anna had married Corbin anyway. Then she died giving birth before her father could forgive either of them or life. Corbin had not seen Edmund Vale in 8 years. And now his name sat under a land seizure scheme wound around marriage, debt, and Corbin's water rights. Eliza looked from the paper to his face. "You know him." He did not answer. "Corbin. My wife's father." She went still. There was no comfort to be offered. Worse, there was sense in it now. The personal mark beside Corbin's name, the insistence on handling him directly, not just land, punishment, correction delayed by years and profit. He stared at Edmund Vale's signature and saw at last how the whole road curved. Not random greed, not county corruption alone. A man with memory and money had come for him through the law because bullets were vulgar and grief had not finished the work. "What does it change?" Eliza asked softly. "Everything." The words came out flatter than he felt, because now the enemy was not only Creed and Bonner and county men for hire. It was blood tied to the woman he still visited in memory more often than in prayer. It was the old accusation beneath all later silence. "You took my daughter west, and she died on your land." Eliza read the contract more closely. "These parcels," she said. "The corridor ends at a depot line proposed but not built. If he secures the center, he can sell the full stretch to the company and clear enough to absorb the county." Corbin said nothing. Then she looked at him and understood another piece. This is revenge dressed as business. "Yes. And if we expose him? Men like Vale do not bruise, they buy distance." She folded the contract carefully. "Then we must hit what distance cannot cover." He almost asked what that meant. Instead, he found himself looking at her in the red shade of the rock wall, dust on her skirt, hair half loosened, face lined by fatigue and determination. This was the midpoint where all stories lie to themselves if they can. A man could still pretend the matter was land only, could still say protect the woman, save the ranch, beat the local villains, go home, but the truth had changed shape. Corbin was no longer merely defending property from a scheme. He was standing in the path of a vengeance years in the making, one that had already reached through his dead wife's name and now meant to use a living woman as the hinge. The spring dripped once into stone. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked. "That if I had married again when people expected, none of this would have worked." "That is not guilt speaking, that is arithmetic." He looked at her, she held his gaze. "Do not hand wicked men the dignity of making your life mistakes for you." The sentence cut clean. He had no reply, which in itself was a reply of sorts. By the time they reached the ranch again, Laurel was dead. Mrs. Prout met them at the porch with eyes gone red and hard. "Eliza," she said, and no more. Eliza did not cry at first. She walked past Corbin, past the kitchen, past the front room, and stood a long while in the guest chamber where Mrs. Prout had laid Laurel's gloves and reticule on the quilt, as if small belongings could guard a soul's passage. Corbin remained outside in the yard until dark. Jeb found him by the fence. "More men left," the foreman said. Corbin nodded. "Banknote came due early." Corbin looked over. Jeb handed him an envelope. The banker's seal, perfect timing, paid pressure. He opened it and read, "Immediate review of collateral obligations due to reported instability. Men in clean coats always found graceful language for a knife." "That's Vale too?" Jeb asked. "Likely." Jeb spat. "Then say the word and I'll ride with you to town tonight." "And to do what?" Jeb's face did not alter. "Whatever, your old wound won't." Corbin almost smiled, almost. "No," he said, "not yet." Inside late, Eliza came to the porch where he sat in darkness. "Laurel told me something before she died," she said. He waited. "She said if I survived, I was not to spend the rest of my life apologizing for being the one left." The night held still. "She also said," Eliza went on, voice thinner now, "that I was wrong about one thing. I thought men never saw me. She said some men saw too much, and simply lacked the courage to speak truth before loss taught them. Corbin knew enough not to ask whether Laurel had meant him. Some answers turn rotten the moment a man grabs for them. He said only, "She fought." "Yes. Not many do when bullets start. She did when it mattered." They sat without speaking for a while. At last Eliza said, "Creed will come with an offer now." Corbin knew it too. Violence had failed to quiet them. Laurel's death had removed one variable and deepened the public stakes. The next move would wear softer gloves. The offer came the following afternoon. A carriage, a white handkerchief tied to the whip. Silas Creed stepping down with all the solemnity of a minister attending a funeral he had arranged. Mrs. Prout refused him coffee. Corbin counted that a minor victory. They met in the study. Eliza stayed. Creed removed his hat. "Miss Vance, accept my condolences." She did not thank him. Creed turned to Corbin. "I am here in good faith." "No," Corbin said. "You rode here breathing." Creed let the insult pass. "Mr. Hale, things have gone farther than intended." Eliza laughed once, and the sound was so sharp Creed actually glanced at her. "Laurel is dead," she said. "You use the language of weather for that." Creed's mouth tightened. "I regret the excesses of lesser men." "Name the men," Corbin said. Creed ignored him. "I am authorized to settle this, quietly. Your banknote will be restored to its original schedule. The shed loss compensated. The county complaint withdrawn. Miss Vance may inherit her family house free and clear." "And in return?" Corbin asked. Creed looked from one to the other. "The marriage proceeds as drafted." The room went cold. Corbin said nothing. Creed mistook that for consideration. "You would retain management of your ranch for 5 years. Operational control remains yours. The larger sale occurs later under favorable terms. Publicly, this is a respectable union. Privately, all parties gain peace." Eliza's face had gone bloodless, but her voice held. "You mean I become the paper bridge by which you rob the county?" Creed spread a hand. "I mean survival often demands arrangements of grace rather than sentiment." Corbin stood, not fast, not dramatic, which made Creed step back anyway. "You rode to my house," Corbin said, "after your men burned my hay, hunted us through an arroyo, and helped kill Miss Vance's sister, to offer me profit if I marry under fraud and call it grace." Creed's throat worked once. "You are emotional." "No," Corbin said. "You have simply mistaken restraint for permission." He leaned one palm on the desk, close enough now that Creed could smell the horse and dust on him, the labor of him, the simple fact he was not a man moved by elegant arguments. "I will give you one gift," Corbin said. "Leave this ranch alive and do not return unless you bring either a confession or your own coffin measurements." Creed tried for dignity, managed only pale fury. "This will ruin you." "Yes," Corbin said, "but the order may surprise you." After he left, Eliza sat down as if her legs had stopped belonging to her. "You could have ended it," she said at last, "with that contract. With your land partly standing." He looked at her. "Do you want me to answer as a businessman or a man?" She gave a tired half shake of the head. "I no longer know which version costs less." He moved to the window. Outside, the carriage dwindled down the lane. "I knew a captain once," he said. "During the war, smartest liar I ever met. He said most evil succeeds because it offers people a version of themselves they can survive living with. Not good, not proud, merely survivable. He turned back. I have survived enough things I'm not proud of. I won't add this. That night they planned, not like dreamers, like besieged people. The copied contract tied Edmund Vale to the county scheme, but a single paper could still be denied, delayed, or buried by better paid men. They needed public force, witnesses, timing, a place where even bought officials would hesitate to lie too openly. The answer came from Mrs. Prout of all people. Founders' Day, she said, kneading bread with furious, practical hands. Half the county in town, band playing, judge preening, preacher blessing pies. If a snake wants sun, that's where he'll lie. So they aimed for Founders' Day. Corbin sent Jeb to quietly summon every family named in the ledger whom he trusted enough to come. Widow Haskins, the Blount brothers, old Samuel Reeve. Marta Klein, whose husband had died in a ditch and left her with 2 girls and thin well water. He sent word to Pastor Lynn and to Doc Penrose, men hard to buy because neither cared much for money beyond what kept others standing. And Sheriff Tully received an invitation with no explanation, but one line in Corbin's hand. If you mean to discover whether your badge is brass or backbone, come to town at noon Saturday. The morning of Founders' Day dawned bright and windless, the sort of innocent sky under which terrible things like to happen because contrast gives them force. Red flats filled early, children with ribboned hats, farmers in washed collars, women carrying covered dishes, a brass band warming up under bunting strung across the square. The courthouse steps dressed with flags and potted ferns as if justice were a parlor to be flattered. Corbin rode in alone. That was deliberate. He wore a black coat brushed clean, hat brim level, no outward sign of the sleepless night since Laurel's death. Men turned as he passed. Some nodded. Some looked away. Some measured the distance to trouble and found themselves too near already. Eliza arrived 10 minutes later in Mrs. Prout's trap, seated between the older woman and Marta Klein. No secret, no shame. Her presence rippled talk through the crowd like wind through wheat. Creed stood near the bandstand with Judge Barlow and 2 rail men from the east. He looked composed until he saw the families gathering in the square, not by chance, but by intent. At noon, the mayor began his remarks. He never finished. Corbin stepped onto the bandstand beside him and took the speaking place with the same calm he might use to inspect a fence line. "Apologies," he said, voice carrying better than some sermons. "But a county celebrating its founding ought to know whether it still belongs to the people who built it." The crowd shifted, murmured, held. Creed moved at once. "Mr. Hale, this is improper." "Then stop me," Corbin said. He set the ledger on the podium. Every eye in the square went to it. "This book lists families in this county marked for acquisition through debt pressure, fraudulent contracts, and coerced marriages," Corbin said. "If you doubt the language, ask the women standing below. Ask the men whose notes came due early after refusing rail agents. Ask the widow whose corral emptied while clerks polished their pen tips." Judge Barlow rose from his chair, face hard. "Mr. Hale, accusations in public require proof." Corbin held up the copied contract. "Here is proof tying the scheme to a final transfer instrument prepared under the authority of Edmund Vale. If that name means little to some of you, it means rail money to the rest. If the judge would like the paper, he may read it where all can hear." The crowd began to make a different sound now, not gossip, recognition. Creed came up the steps. "This document is stolen property." Eliza's voice rose clear from below. So was my sister's life. The square went silent. She stepped forward, no veil, no ornament, only truth and grief sharpened into steadiness. Mrs. Pruitt stood at her shoulder like judgment in an apron. Laurel Vance died because men in this county thought a woman could be moved like a signature, Eliza said. I signed papers under threat. I copied others when I understood what was being done. Mr. Bonner struck me. Mr. Creed directed. And when I tried to stop it, riders were sent. Sheriff Tully pushed through the crowd then, hat off, deputies behind him. Creed's face changed. Not much. Enough. Judge Barlow said, Sheriff, maintain order. Tully looked up at the bandstand, then at the gathered families, then at Corbin and Eliza. Order, he said, depends who's been breaking it. Barlow's jaw hardened. Mind yourself. Tully did. For the first time in years perhaps, he truly did. Read the paper, Corbin said to the judge. Barlow hesitated. The whole county watched. That was the point. A corrupt man alone is dangerous. A corrupt man observed is merely cowardly until he chooses. Barlow took the contract. His voice started formal and went hoarse halfway through Edmund Vale's name and the parcel descriptions that followed. Water rights, corridor control, consolidated sale option, contingent marriage execution. By the time he finished, the square felt different beneath everyone's feet, less like a celebration. More like a grave uncovering. Then came the turn Corbin had prepared for and dreaded. He took the paper back and said, There is one more matter, my own. He looked out across the faces. Ranchers, townsfolk, men who envied him, men who respected him. Women who distrusted all rich bachelors as a matter of domestic religion. Children too young to know they were present at the breaking of something. This contract names me as party to a fraudulent marriage arrangement with Miss Eliza Vance, he said. Since the law here has shown itself vulnerable to bought men and twisted wording, I will make my meaning plain where all can hear it. He turned toward Eliza. The title promise had waited, built pressure, cost lives, changed shape. Now it arrived not as romance but as moral risk. Miss Vance, he said, and his voice carried clean in the noon heat, I will not let these men use your name to take this county and call it lawful. If public choice is the shield they built their trap around, then I make mine in public too, not your sister, you. No one breathed. He went on. I choose your word over their paper, your safety over my title, your truth over my land. The square seemed to tilt. That was not a proposal, not the kind ballads lie about. It was something older and more dangerous, a declaration of alignment that no rumor could soften now. Creed seized on it at once. You hear him, he cried. He admits intent. The marriage stands. His property is in execution by his own public acknowledgement. There it was, the knife turned openly. Corbin had known it would come. He looked at Tully. Sheriff. Tully's hand rested on his badge. The whole county waited to learn which metal it truly was. Then the sheriff climbed the bandstand, crossed to Creed, and said, Sealers Creed, I am arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud, coercion, and complicity in the death of Laurel Vance, pending full inquiry. The square broke into noise. Creed drew back. You cannot. Tully said, I just did. The railmen tried to leave. Jeb Mercer and two of Corbin's hands blocked them at the foot of the steps. Doc Penrose moved through the crowd toward the stunned mayor as if public collapses were a medical condition. Barlow remained seated. Beaten by the simple indecency of witnesses, Creed made one final play. He pointed at Corbin. If Hale chooses her publicly, the transfer triggers by the contract's own language. Arrest me if you must. It changes nothing. His land is forfeit. That hit the crowd too, because law once taught to fear makes decent people flinch even when wicked hands hold it. Corbin felt the truth of the blow, everything narrowed. This was the final cost walking up in daylight. He could still step back, claim imprecision, withdraw, let lawyers gnaw the matter for years while families went broke and memory cooled. Or he could do the one thing no man in the scheme expected from him. He turned to Judge Barlow. Is this court still empowered to hear a renunciation of title before witnesses? He asked. Barlow stared. What? A renunciation, Corbin repeated. If the land is the bait, I cut it loose. Here now. The square went dead silent again. Eliza whispered, Corbin. He did not look at her because if he did, he might hear the human side too loudly. Barlow said, You would abandon your estate. I would place it in trust. For whom? Corbin drew a breath that felt like taking in a knife. For the families named in the ledger whose properties were targeted under this scheme. Water access first. Stewardship by elected local board until lawful titles are restored and debts reviewed by state investigators. Barlow rose slowly. You understand what you say? Yes. You may be left with nothing. Yes. Even if the contract fails later, this declaration can still stand. Yes. The judge searched his face for drama and found only decision. Corbin said, I know what permanent means. That sentence carried farther than shouting would have. Eliza covered her mouth with one hand. Creed went white, because that was the one move his kind never saw. Greed understands greed. Fear understands fear. But a man willing to pay the price before the bill is fully due becomes dangerous in a way no contract can hold. Barlow looked at the square, at the witnesses, at the sheriff, at the paper in his own hand. Then, whether from conscience, vanity, or some late-blooming scrap of honor, he said, Bring the clerk. What followed took less than 20 minutes and changed a county. Statements recorded. Emergency trust declaration entered. Sheriff's arrests made in full public view. The railmen detained. The contract seized. Pastor Lynn called up to witness. Widow Haskins weeping openly beside Marta Klein. Jeb standing with his hat crushed in both hands and looking at Corbin as if trying to reconcile admiration with outrage. Corbin signed with a shaking left hand braced by his right, that more than anything, people remembered later. Not a heroic flourish, not a clean line, a damaged hand forcing itself through the act because a broken man had chosen to bind justice to paper before wicked men could do the reverse. When it was finished, the bell at St. Agnes began ringing. Nobody had asked for it. Some child or sexton had simply understood history better than officials did. Creed was led away between deputies, coat dusty, dignity gone. As he passed Corbin, he said in a low voice, Vale will not forgive this. Corbin answered, just as low. He was never going to. Then Creed was gone. By sundown word had ridden farther than any warrant. Edmund Vale himself did not appear. Men like him sent replies through banks, telegrams, and colder channels. 3 days later, the bank foreclosed on the remainder of Corbin's personal holdings outside the trust. 2 weeks later, state agents arrived. A month later, Bonner named names to save his own skin. By winter, the corridor scheme had cracked wide enough that Eastern papers used words like scandal and irregularity, while local folk used older ones like theft and murder. Corbin lost the house, not at once. Law prefers to take a man in measured bites. He kept a small bunkhouse on the west pasture and enough cattle wages through Jeb's stubbornness to remain useful where once he had been owner. The main house passed into the trust's temporary administration before title adjustments spread it among those the scheme had nearly swallowed. The creek stayed open to them all. People came to thank him, and he disliked it equally each time. "I did not save you," he told old Samuel Reeve. "I merely refused to join them." Samuel answered, "That is rarer than saving." By spring, the flower beds under the old porch windows were green again because Mrs. Prout bullied the new board into allowing them restored. "A house ought not wear mourning forever," she said. Since nobody alive was strong enough to defeat Mrs. Prout on a matter of domestic morality, the flowers stood. Eliza moved into the Vance house for a while, then out again when the rooms became too full of ghosts and old bargains. She taught at the church school through winter and spent evenings helping families untangle deeds, notes, and claims because she could read the language that had nearly buried them. People who once said everyone wanted her sister began saying different things now. They said Eliza Vance kept books honest. They said she had a spine forged in drought. They said men listened when she spoke because they had learned the cost of not doing so. Laurel was not forgotten. In the cemetery above town, sisters brought cedar branches in winter and wildflowers in spring. Some Sundays Corbin saw Eliza walking there alone and did not intrude. Their own matter remained unresolved in the only way that mattered. He had chosen her in public. True, but not for courtship, not first. For justice, protection, truth. The title promise had been delivered in the square, but life after such a choice does not arrange itself into easy song. There was grief between them. Suspicion gone but memory not. A sister dead. A ranch surrendered. Too much ash to call the next thing simple, so they moved carefully. One evening in late April, Corbin was mending a fence on land that no longer answered to his name when Eliza rode up with a sack of seed potatoes and a look he had begun to recognize as trouble carrying purpose. "You missed the board meeting," she said. "I am cultivating that habit. They argue better when you are there. They argue because I'm not. That too." He hammered the staple in with more force than needed. "If this is about committee governance, I'd sooner wrestle a steer bare-handed." It is not," she dismounted. State agents found correspondence from Vale. That got his attention. She handed him a folded copy. He read enough to know the old man had cut his losses and withdrawn east under a cloud broad enough to stain but not imprison. Men of his class seldom wore iron unless they stole from richer men. At the bottom was one line in Vale's hand. "You have taken from yourself the only thing I intended to take from you. I do not know whether that is defeat or inheritance." Corbin read it twice. Then he folded it and handed it back. "Eliza," he said, "burn that before I decide old men deserve less dignity than grave." She tucked it away. "As you wish." He returned to the fence. After a moment she said, "Laurel once told me that some people mistake being wanted for being valued." He glanced up. She was wanted everywhere, Eliza said. By men, by rooms, by schemes, by foolish talk. She knew the difference before she died. Eliza's hands rested on the saddle horn. I did not. The wind moved through the grass. Calves bawled beyond the rise. Corbin said quietly, I suspect I did not know the difference either. She looked at him then in the late light. No music, no grand audience, no courthouse, no trap, no fire, only a fence line, a man with dirt on his sleeves, a woman who had survived being overlooked and weaponized and left standing anyway. "What do you know now?" she asked. He set the hammer down on the post. "That wanting is easy," he said. "Men wanted your sister because beauty asks nothing but appetite. Value is costlier, it asks witness, choice, staying after the spectacle is done." Her face changed, not into softness exactly, but into something unguarded enough to matter. "And you," he said, "have been costlier than any truth I have ever held." For a long moment she did not speak. Then she said, "That is the nearest thing to tenderness you have likely offered in years. It is the nearest thing I have had." She stepped closer, leaving the horse where it stood. "Corbin." He waited. "When you chose me in the square, I knew why you did it. I knew it was not romance. I was grateful for the truth of that, even when it hurt." Her voice held steady. "I do not need pretty lies. I have buried enough." Neither moved. Then she said the one thing no one else in the county would ever have dared say to him. "Do you choose me still, now that the land is gone?" He answered without pause, because some questions, once earned, deserve no suspense. "Yes." The words seemed to settle into the field and make a shape there. She let out a breath that might have been carrying winter from her lungs. "Then I choose you too," she said. No bells rang, no crowd cheered. A hawk circled high above the pasture and the wind bent the grass in one direction, then another. Corbin stepped toward her slowly, as though approaching something honest after a long season among traps. When he touched her face, it was with the carefulness of a man who had seen too many living things broken by careless claims. She lifted her hand and covered his, steadying the tremor he could never fully command. The kiss, when it came, held no youthful heat. It held promise, grief, survival, and the strange humility of people too old in spirit to confuse rescue with possession. Summer brought new fences and new arguments, and a better use of the creek than the valley had known in years. The trust board divided parcels fairly where it could, compensated where it could not, and learned the exhausting truth that justice in peacetime often requires more paperwork than war. Corbin worked for wages and found, to his mild disgust, that freedom from ownership made certain mornings easier. He slept in the bunkhouse, rose early, mended what needed mending, and no longer had to weigh every cloud against mortgage and payroll. Loss had stripped him, yes. It had also simplified him. People treated him differently now, some with reverence he disliked, some with wariness sharpened by respect, some with the awkward gratitude reserved for men who embarrass others by proving courage possible. Children changed fastest. They ceased seeing him as the rich, lonely rancher on the rise and started seeing him as the man who fixed trough pumps, spoke little, and always had peppermints in one coat pocket because Mrs. Prout insisted hard men should not become useless ones. Eliza laughed more by autumn, not often, never foolishly, but the sound came easier. She turned the old Vance house into a records office 2 mornings a week and a schoolroom the rest. Women came with folded deeds. Men came with hat brims in their hands. She sorted, translated, advised. When officials blustered, she blustered less and won more. One October evening they walked to Laurel's grave together. The sky had gone pale gold. Grasshoppers ticked in the weeds. Eliza laid down asters and straightened the small stone that had settled crooked after rain. She would have hated the plainness of it, Eliza said softly. Corbin looked at the marker. She might have liked being remembered for more than her face. Eliza smiled. That she would. They stood a while without speaking. At last Corbin said, "I used to think grief was proof of failure. That if a man had been stronger, quicker, wiser, he might have held the dead in place by force of deserving them." Eliza glanced at him. He rarely opened doors inward. When he did, it mattered. "Anna died, and I made a religion of punishment out of surviving her," he said. "I told myself solitude was fidelity. Maybe some of it was. Some of it was cowardice too." Eliza took his arm. "You do not betray the dead by living honestly after them." He looked at the stone, then at the horizon beyond the cemetery where the valley spread wide and changed and still itself. "No," he said, "I suppose not." The first snow that year came early and light, whitening the fencer lines and softening the stubble fields. From the rise above the old house, the valley looked stitched together rather than carved apart. Smoke rose from homes that had nearly been lost. Cattle moved dark against white ground. Children slid on frozen ruts where last year armed riders had passed. Corbin stood by the gate with Eliza at his side. Not his gate anymore. The trust road crossed there now. He rested his hands on the wood and watched a wagon from the Klein place roll toward town loaded with winter squash and wool. Marta's two girls sat atop the sacks in red scarves, laughing at the cold. "That is your creek they're using," Eliza said. He shook his head. "Not mine." The correction came easy now. A little later, Widow Haskins rode by with her grandson. Samuel Reeve followed in a cart. Then Pastor Lynn on a mule that resented religion. They all waved because in small places peace announces itself by routine more than words. Corbin looked out over the land and felt, not joy exactly, but something steadier. A rightness purchased dear and therefore free of illusion. Beside him, Eliza tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The ownership." "Yes." He considered. Then he said, "Sometimes. Usually when I see a fence leaning and remember I once had the authority to curse it properly." That drew a laugh from her, warm in the cold air. "But no," he said after a moment, "not in the way I feared." Below them the valley breathed smoke and frost and labor. He had lost the house, the title, the shape of the life people once thought enviable. He had kept a smaller thing and discovered it was larger. His name no longer sat over acres. It stood in memory beside a choice. Everyone had wanted her sister. That had been true in the shallow way counties speak truth. They had wanted the glitter, the ease, the face that made appetite feel like destiny. But when appetite had finished its ruin and paper had shown its teeth, the man people called rich had chosen otherwise, not because plainness was safer, not because beauty had failed him. Not because he was noble in the storybook sense. He chose the woman who could see the trap, name the cost, and stand inside the fire without surrendering her soul. He chose witness over wanting. He chose honor over possession. And the land itself, stripped of one man's claim and returned in pieces to many hands, seemed to hold that choice in the quiet way earth holds all costly things, without applause, without forgetting. Snow began again, light as ash, settling on the rails and hats and road. Corbin drew Eliza closer against the cold. The gate creaked in the wind. Then the valley went on living. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help this old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matter. So, till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.